Hey everybody, this is the Sliders Review, and I'm here today to talk to you about Starfleet Academy has just been canceled. So after the second season, there will be no season 3. I'm not really surprised. I don't think nobody's really surprised. No matter how you feel about this show, I truly don't believe nobody is really surprised because when it comes to a lot of new Star Trek shows, I'm almost positive that this show divided the fan base way worse than that of Star Trek Discovery or Lower Decks. With Lower Decks, most people just tend to like it because they like raunchy humor. I can't watch Lower Decks because even though I love South Park, I love Family Guy, I don't want to see Star Trek be South Park or Family Guy. So I haven't watched since the first episode, but a lot of people who tend to hate New Trek tend to like Lower Decks. But of course, Discovery, but I will go even further to say the JJ movies is the one that really divided me. But for the most part, Discovery divided fans. But then Starfleet Academy came out and the fan base just went nuclear and, and like the toxic community and everything. Even people who give Discovery a chance and says, it's not that bad or whatever, a lot of them really hate Academy. I've seen tons of people bash this show. I've seen tons of people praise this show. Nevertheless, it did divide the fandom. The people who made this show, they took a big risk. They experimented. As we now see, that experiment, it worked for some, but it did not work for everybody. And when it works for some and not a larger scale, networks tend to cancel things. It also never rated on the Nielsen chart, and that's a big thing for streaming. They want to be able to hop on that chart and everything and be all like, hey, look at us. We made a show that's charting now. So, and of course, a lot of people are going to defend and say the first episode had huge ratings. Well, that's because people was curious to know what it was going to be like and everything. Then once they saw what it was going to be like, this is when people started to get divided and everything. And I've still only watched the first episode. For me, Academy just wasn't for me, so I decided not to watch it. I have been kind of curious to want to watch it. But after watching a couple of people's reviews, I'm just kind of like, maybe this is just not for me. And I don't want to watch it because I know I'm going to hate watch and I know I'm going to complain. And I don't feel like doing that. And when it comes to reviews, I'm very selective of who I watch for reviews. Toxic people, I won't watch. People who gush over this show and praise it nonstop and that has no flaws for it, I don't watch. I tend to try to watch somewhere in between the middle. So there's really only 2 reviewers that I watch, because for the most part they don't seem that toxic. Although one who's always been fairly nice over the years, he's friends with one of those toxic people and subscribes to them. And he completely flipped out when Jaden started wearing a scant and wore that dress at that wedding ceremony. So that makes me now wonder about him. But for the most part, he does seem on the level and everything. And he breaks things down accordingly. And so it's I feel like I'm getting a just review when it comes to him. And just the things I started seeing in the show and the clips, I'm just kind of like, it's just not for me. I mean, they tried to make a young adult YA novel, almost teen drama type show out of Star Trek. They tried to appeal to a completely different audience because the older audience is either dead or getting old and everything. But, and while experimentation should be applauded, that don't mean experiments are always gonna work. Like I told you before, I love Star Trek. I love young adult dramas and teen dramas, but I don't want to see those two things combined. It just doesn't appeal to me. And for the most part, it doesn't appeal to other people. And I've seen people defend this show like to extreme lengths of like reaching and stuff, but it's just kind of like it gets to a point where people's defense start to be excuses. And you gotta start seeing the writing on the wall. This just was not for everybody. Even some people who like gave this show a chance and like are not toxic, they still couldn't like wrap around their head the immaturity of this show and everything. Like it was just like a wild kooky teen like angst type show. And even in the sense of Star Trek, you know what I'm saying? Like, Star Trek is not a teenage type thing. Starfleet Academy officers are young adult people in their early 20s, not teens. Having high school shenanigans and everything was just weird. Having, like, frat party college type movie shenanigans was just kind of weird because it went too much in a different direction of what Star Trek is not. And the thing is kind of like when you have a property that lasted for so long, to alienate the fan base or any fan base, whatever, and try to reshape it into something different, is that really like your responsibility to do? Like, you know what I'm saying? Because it's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like, take Batman. Comics, like when I first got introduced to Batman, it was the Adam West Batman show. I assume that's how Batman was, running around during the daytime, bright colorful outfit, all this bright color stuff everywhere, silliness, stuff like that. Then I watched Tim Burton's Batman movie. I'm just kind of like, whoa, this is even cooler than the Adam West stuff. Then I watched Batman the Animated Series, which is also dark. Then I found out in the comics, oh, he does wear that blue and gray outfit, but he mostly operates at night, and his comics can get pretty dark depending on what decade era you're reading from, And since then, Batman has been consistently, a moody, kind of dark, gritty type thing. And so it's kind of like, while the Adam West Batman show is beloved and stuff, that was an experiment. And people are not that over. And people gravitate more towards the dark broodiness of Batman, the darker costume, the darker villains and everything, And so Starfleet Academy kind of went into this, hey, we need to start bringing in young adults and teenagers to start watching for the next era of like Star Trek. Because the older people are getting older and some of them are dead. I shouldn't be laughing, but it's just like they did, Like it's the truth. A lot of the older people who love Star Trek are either really old or they're dead. And so like, but the thing is like, people who are really like young nowadays, they don't really watch sci-fi type stuff that's like Star Trek. Also, like I said before, when I was growing up in middle school and high school, the cool kids did not watch Star Trek. So I started hanging out with the nerdy people because they like Star Trek and everything. And that's what they tried to do with this show. They tried to appeal it to like the cool kids and everything, but the cool kids still just did not want to watch. Like, no matter how much silly shenanigans you have, or curse words, or saying the word bruh, or every time they're listening to music nowadays in New Trek, it's always like current like hip hop music, and it's like they're acting like they're in the club, and I'm just kind of like, in older Trek, when they listen to music, everybody wasn't dancing around acting like they're in the club and everything. And that's how it is now because they're trying to appeal to people like that. But people like that don't want to watch it. They rather just go to the club. Also, it's kind of like then you're gonna have some of those people who are newer Star Trek fans who only know the Paramount Kurtzman era and everything. They'll watch the newer stuff and say they like it, right? But then say they go back and they watch the older stuff and either like they just fall in love with the older stuff. So then the newer stuff ain't gonna appeal to them because they actually like the older, boring, more storytelling and everything, you know? So then that will backfire. And so, I honestly, I knew this was going to happen. There is no way Starfleet Academy was going to get a third season. I'm sorry, but that's just the truth. And I think everybody knew that, but some people just didn't want to admit to the truth. I mean, they have new leadership over there at Paramount, the Ellises and everything, who are very rooted in current politics and everything. The fan base is divided. You have all those hate channels and everything. People in politics pay attention now to those hate channels and stuff. Not to mention, with Ellis and everything, in the way he's operating, do you really see a show like Starfleet Academy getting like 5 seasons over at Paramount in the age of the new political climate? Because I'm pretty sure you know who is a Star Trek fan, and of course Ellis listens to everything he says and everything. Because like he even made this like some kind of thing with NASA, some kind of space thing. I forgot what it was, but he used the Star Trek Delta logo for this new like program and everything, which tells me he's a fan, you know what I'm saying? And of course, Ellis is going to listen to him and stuff. And, when you have people like Elon Musk chiming in and everything, you knew this show was going to be dead in the water. Like, you just knew it was never going to go forward and everything. And a lot of Star Trek fans just don't like Kurtzman's new era of Star Trek. A lot of it just doesn't feel like Star Trek, and people want it to feel like Star Trek. And now of course you got the bigots out there who are just gonna be bigoted and everything. But for the non-bigots, even like myself, who's a non-bigot and everything, I want Star Trek to feel and look like Star Trek. I just do. You know what I'm saying? I want that old, boring, world building, type storylines about exploration and emotion and allegories and this and that. I have not really had that in a long time, and I love the fact that new Star Trek, like the one thing I really like about new Trek is that it's very diverse now. But it's something the older shows should have been way more diverse than what it was in the past. Yes, we can all say, there was Geordi, Worf, and Tuvok, and Harry Kim, and Uhura, and stuff like that. But that was just small diversity and stuff, Like now Star Trek has way more diversity, which is great. But I do feel like when it comes to new Trek, they care more about more modern day diversity than they did storytelling. I just have a feeling that's the way they was going and stuff, And it really seemed like they catered more to that than actually telling stories of Star Trek and stuff. And they wanted to be more darker and more grittier and stuff. Like back in season 2, I think, of Discovery, why did I need to see a Klingon chop the head off of a pretend baby and everything? I don't need to see that. Also, why do I need to see two people having sex naked and seeing Klingon boobs and everything? Why do I need to see that and everything? And then of course there are the redesigns of the Klingons, and it's just kind of like when you do something like that in Discovery season 1 and then try to fix it in season 2 and make an even bigger mess and try to change the canon of the lore of why they have hair and why they do not, And then all of a sudden, you get Picard season 3, and Worf looks as normal can be, like a typical Klingon. But then it's like, well, what happened to the Discovery Klingons? And then you get Strange New Worlds, and then you get Academy, and Klingons are back to looking the way they are. And there's no explanation for any of that other than a creative decision. Then you don't need to be making a show and everything. Then also to try to make fans happy, they relied too much on nostalgia. Hey, remember when this happened back in this show? Or remember this character? Or remember this alien species? And blah blah blah. And they just kept tying it into their new storylines without actually telling new storylines. Also, they kept missing the mark. Take Strange New Worlds. I like Strange New Worlds and everything. But Strange New Worlds doesn't actually go to Strange New Worlds. So why is that in the title? And then they started relying too much on nostalgia and everything. And it's just kind of like the thought process just isn't there for New Trek. Like, I'm sorry, it is just not. Then there is all the like modern slang terms and the modern clothes that they wear. Why do I need to see a person living in the 24th century wearing jeans and a t-shirt with a logo on it? Why like do I need to see like technology that's from like the 24th century and stuff? Like, I keep seeing people in wheelchairs. Why? Like, we've seen they have hover wheelchairs in TNG and stuff. Now, technically, yes, in Deep Space Nine, there was that one woman who had a wheelchair. But I like to think, hey, that's her alien species, not that evolved. You know what I'm saying? Because other times you see humans wearing like other humans riding around in a wheelchair. It's a hover wheelchair, not one that actually has wheels. And I've seen one with wheels in Discovery and Starfleet Academy. And don't even get me started on people wearing glasses. They have transporter technology, but yet they still can get laser eye surgery. And yeah, I know Geordi was blind, but he was born blind, all right? But still, why are they wearing glasses in the 24th century? They tried way too freaking hard to appeal to a modern audience and everything. Things that are familiar, but doesn't really fit the mold of like, hey, we're in the future and crap. You know, and so if you're in the future, you better freaking act like you in the future and everything. I don't want to see people in the future acting as modern can be. I just don't. I really just don't. You know, and so look, it is what it is. If you liked it, good for you. If you hated it, whatever. But it's like, it's over with now. And there really ain't no telling what Star Trek is going to look like in the future. Like, just going to have to wait and see. Also, once again, let's not forget about the merger and stuff. Like, that's one of the things that always suck when two companies merge, is that you lose stuff. Some things you keep and some things you don't. Most of the things that you keep are either things that are very successful or very cheap, or something that the new boss tends to like and everything. Like, I remember there was this show, I've talked about this before, called I, Frankie. It was a Nickelodeon show. I really enjoyed it. It was somewhat different than your normal Nickelodeon shows and stuff. And it lasted for 2 seasons. Many years later, one of the stars has finally confirmed what happened, because most of the stars either just don't care, aren't that famous, or they just don't know. But she said the reason is because they got a new CEO and he just didn't like the show. And so that normally what happens with a lot of stuff. You know, if you merge with another company and you start picking, hey, which shows are cheaper to make, which shows are like, you know, fan favorites, and which ones do I like. And, you know, these newer Star Trek shows have a massive budget. The CGI is insane. Plus, when you bring back legacy stars, a lot of them are not cheap. Like, Patrick Stewart is not cheap whatsoever. That's one of the reasons why you don't really see him appear in other television shows and stuff, because the man is super expensive. And it doesn't really matter to him if it's movies or television shows, he'll go either way. But I remember when Gargoyles came out, a lot of Star Trek stars were in Gargoyles, like as a voice cast and stuff. They said the reason why they didn't get Patrick Stewart is because he's just too expensive. And this was back in the 90s and stuff. And so, like, you gotta remember when you merge with another company, you take on their debt. Like, when, what's his name? David Zaslav bought like HBO Max, he took on the debt that they had, and he just now is able to make a pretty good profit in the year 2025 and everything. But I mean, it's been a long time since he merged. I think that was like early 2020s and stuff. And just last year, he was able to make a profit with a lot of the stuff that he, was making and stuff. And so I don't know if HBO Max is still in debt or not, but, money is always something to look into. And like I said, these Star Trek shows, these newer ones, are no longer cheap to make. They used to be, but not no more and everything. And I also think fan reception also helped kill this show. I mean, seriously, it's like you have to reach everybody, not just like a small group of people. And I truly feel like Starfleet Academy had a small fan base. And just to reiterate, no, I'm not laughing at dead people. I'm just laughing at the way I said it. But yeah, I'm not surprised this show is ending. I don't think nobody should be surprised. If you are surprised, you've been living under a rock. With the merger going on, with, the Ellises being the way they are, with fan reception and everything, and, the budget of making this show, I'm not surprised that, like, this ended and stuff. Because currently there are no new Star Trek projects because everything's been canceled now. I think except for that animated one that's on like Nickelodeon, which I keep forgetting about that. But the reception of Star Trek has been extremely mixed to negative. I mean, Section 31. I didn't see not one person like that. Not one single person. Not even the people who like the Finn in New Trek. I didn't see not one person like that. And that's because Star Trek just no longer looks and sounds and feels like Star Trek. It just went in a completely different direction to where, like, it's unrecognizable now. And it's a shame, It just really is. Because Star Trek is a great franchise, a really, really great franchise, until it wasn't no more. And I haven't really been happy with Star Trek since J.J. Abrams' movies came out. I just can't wrap my head around those movies. I just can't. Alrighty, well, I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.